My name is Nick Rainey, the Represent Sierra Vista leader and volunteer with Represent Us. We're a nonpartisan campaign of over 500,000 Americans working in communities all across the country to fight political corruption and reduce the influence of big money in politics. Thank you for joining me today to talk about our plan to fix government corruption. I'll give you some background on our campaign and explain how you can get more involved. If you're like me, you're sick and tired of a government that doesn't represent us, but you might also feel like there's nothing you can do about that. That's where you're wrong. I'm here today because we can do something about this problem. And if we don't, we're never going to see real progress on the issues we all care about. The corrupting influence of money in U.S. politics has escalated into a national crisis that blocks effective policy solutions on nearly every issue, from the economy and jobs to healthcare, education, immigration, and the federal budget. Some of you might be wondering, is money in politics really a problem? Well, let's look at a 20-year study of over 1,700 public polls and how they correlate to bills passed in Congress. The study measured public support for an idea. It also measured the chance of an idea actually becoming a law. In an ideal republic, the chart should look something like this, where public support for an idea is represented in the bills that pass through Congress. But look at what the researchers found when they studied our republic. They found that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So that's the influence of the bottom 90%. Now let's look at the influence of the top 10%. As you can see, there's quite a difference, and although it's not quite an ideal republic, the views of the top 10% are much better represented in the laws that have passed through Congress over the last 20 years. Now, after seeing that, you might say, that's an abomination. Whatever happened to a government of, by, and for the people? I've never heard of anything so un-American. What's most worrying here is that buying influence in our government is legal, and that means, really, that corruption is legal. And this corruption is fundamental to every part of the system, from how politicians run, to how we vote as everyday Americans, to how they govern when they're elected. So what does this corruption look like? Politicians spend about 75% of their time fundraising for their re-election campaign. In the Senate, that means they raise about $14,351 per day that they're in office. And the important point here is that this money does not come from everyday Americans. It comes from the most wealthy 0.05% of people in this country. In 93% of political races, the candidate with the most money wins, and so our elected officials are dependent on the 0.05%. Then once the candidate who raised the money wins, they get to redraw their districts. That means they get to choose their voters rather than the voters choosing them. It's called gerrymandering, and it makes our elections less competitive. Because of gerrymandering, 86% of House races are not competitive. And what about the 14% of competitive races? Even there we have a problem. Candidates can and do win elections even when most voters oppose them. That's because our primaries favor extreme candidates, leaving voters in a general election to choose between the lesser of two evils when they get to the ballot box. Being dependent on the wealthiest donors to get elected, being able to choose voters and practically guarantee re-election, not needing to appeal to the majority of voters, all of this affects how our elected officials govern once they're elected. This cycle of extortion and bribery has special interests and lobbyists buying access that the vast majority of this country simply cannot afford. Now this problem can seem overwhelming, and we can feel like there's nothing we can do about it. But there is a solution. The solution is that we need to make corruption illegal. So about 4 years ago, a mix of advocacy experts, attorneys, and grassroots activists joined forces to draw comprehensive legislation to stop the corruption of our political system. The group includes pioneers in the field, including former Federal Election Commission Chair Trevor Potter, former counsel to George W. Bush, Lawrence Lessig, Harvard professor and founder of Mayday PAC, Jack Abramoff, former infamous lobbyist turned reformer. Their proposal is called the American Anti-Corruption Act. It strengthens existing election laws and takes several important ethics and anti-corruption measures like disclosure and redistricting and packages them in one comprehensive piece of legislation. This is a model policy that we can use to push for reform in cities and states across the country, and the policy has three major components. Fix our broken elections so the people, not the political establishment, are the ones in control. It also ends secret money so we know who's trying to buy political power. We need full disclosure about who is donating to what campaign. The Anti-Corruption Act ends political bribery so lobbyists and special interests can't use donations and job offers to influence politicians. What is particularly great about the model policy is that it would be deemed constitutional today, even given the current state of the Supreme Court. The American Anti-Corruption Act, popular among people across the political spectrum. Represent Us has commissioned national polls, and we found over 90% support for this act. Now, passing such a reform is a huge challenge. Let's face it, Congress is broken, and they're not going to fix it for us. This is pretty clear. This is the system that got them reelected, or elected in the first place. This is the system that pays for their reelection. We looked at what strategies have been working for other campaigns, and we found that those campaigns making the most strides over the last 10 to 20 years have focused on winning at the local level. We're emulating these modern national campaigns that have succeeded in redrawing the political map on hard-to-win issues such as gun rights and marijuana reform. These campaigns went around Congress, leveraging cross-partisan, nationally coordinated movements to pass ballot initiatives in cities and states across America. Represent Us is replicating their success by passing comprehensive city and state anti-corruption acts. A key strategy in the Represent Us campaign is to start locally and think nationally. That means we can build up momentum and power for the anti-corruption movement right here in the Sierra Vista area. Every resolution or reform measure we push for here at home will bring us one step closer to the statewide and nationwide anti-corruption reform we so desperately need. There are 3 keys to passing these anti-corruption laws across the country. The first key is a corruption framing, as opposed to money in politics or saving democracy. We call it corruption because while what goes on in politics is technically legal, it is so obviously corrupt, we have special interests literally paying our legislators and getting something in return. This corruption framing is what motivates people to take action. It gets people paying attention. Campaign finance reform puts people to sleep. Represent Us commissioned an independent poll about how we talk about this issue, and when we call it corruption, we see a 20% bump in support for new law. The second key is that we must be cross-partisan with support from local members on the right and the left. This means that you're going to have to work with people who you don't agree with on many other issues. We have to get over our differences if we want to take our government back. Currently, the government is divided roughly in thirds, with 1/3 progressive, 1/3 conservative, and 1/3 moderate. Because this problem is so huge, we're talking about changing the way power works in America. We can't do that with only 1/3 of the country behind us. We need to overwhelm our elected officials with public support. A lot of people wonder, in our hyper-partisan political climate, can we really bring people together from the left and the right to support anti-corruption reform? Not only can we do it, we're already doing it. The first anti-corruption act in this country was spearheaded by a local cross-partisan coalition consisting of a former Republican legislator and a former Democratic legislator. This strange bedfellow coalition ultimately led this group to victory. Cross-partisan support will be crucial to our success in other cities and states. In cities and counties across the country, conservatives and progressives are getting together in meetings like this one and are uniting to fix our broken political system. The third key is that these anti-corruption acts must be comprehensive. A piecemeal approach doesn't deliver on the kind of reform we really need in this country. This means we need to work on reforming all of the ways that corruption gets into our system, from how local politicians run to how we vote to how they govern. We know our nation is ready for this kind of comprehensive reform. And our movement proved that to be true by winning big this past election day. That think whatever you want about the presidential election, but across the country, Represent Us members push for reform and prove that anti-corruption wins. On November 8, 2016, voters in South Dakota passed America's first statewide anti-corruption act. Previously ranked as one of the most at-risk states for corruption, South Dakota passed reform to set up an independent ethics commission, put caps on the gifts that lobbyists can give to politicians, and empower regular people to participate in the political process with citizen-funded elections. This is the kind of reform we can win if we work with people across the state and bring anti-corruption reform to the voters. Our members also passed local resolutions in 2 counties in Illinois and Proposition T in San Francisco, a lobbyist gift ban. These are only a few of the 13 victories for the anti-corruption movement that happened during this election. We're already winning, and we want to win nationally.